Welcome to our webinar on Organisational Change Capability. My name is Tony Carlton and I'm the Director of Corporate and Professional Education for Macquarie Business School. How well equipped is your organisation to respond to rapidly changing circumstances? Helen Campbell is going to help us come to grips with this critically important question. Helen is an organisational change practitioner with over 20 years' experience across a range of industries. She works with us here at Macquarie Business School on several of our short courses. Her practical experience and insights generate a wealth of storytelling that is always popular with her workshop participants. This webinar will be recorded and made available to all participants. We encourage you to use the chat function throughout the webinar, and there will be time at the end to explore questions raised by you. You might also want to minimise your speaker gallery, which should be on the top right-hand side of the screen. I would now like to hand over to Helen.
Thanks, Tony, and good morning, everyone. And I'd like to encourage you to use that chat function as you go through, post any questions or observations. You might have some examples that you want to share with the rest of the group, so please, as we go through, please use that function. Now, as I was thinking about what might be a really useful topic for this session in relation to change, I was reminded of a time earlier in my career where I was part of a team that was working on the refurbishment of a 42-storey office block in the middle of the City of London. It was the head office for a bank. And at 10 o'clock on one Saturday morning in April, the IRA detonated a truckload of explosives right outside and destroyed 3/4 of that building and several buildings around it. And a bit like the situation we found ourselves in recently, what we had on our hands was obviously an imposed change with ridiculously short deadlines, and we had to move and mobilise quickly. So a bit like the situation we're in now, we found we changed everything about the way we did things. And when I look back on that time, it's really clear that we did things that would have seemed impossible before. So we managed to rehouse 3,500 team members in 2 days. Now you can imagine if you go into your organisation and suggest a project whose mission is to rehouse 3,500 people in 2 days, your colleagues would probably think that you're slightly mad. But we managed to do that because when push came to shove, there were all sorts of things that we could do that we'd never thought about or never had permission to do before. The same was true of our vendors. Prior to that situation, we had long lead times for services and products. And what we found is that if the bomb went off on the Saturday morning, on the Sunday, people turned up with equipment. So why were the lead times so long? Services, it would take 90 days to get a circuit in. Well, we proved you can do it in a week. So through having to do things differently, we managed to quickly break through into a lot of new ways of working, which then stuck after the situation cleared. So again, there was a long lead out of the situation, but those lead times were never 90 days again. And so much had changed about the way that we worked that we managed to keep hold of as we came out of that. So it does seem to me that, at a time like this, there's probably a few things that we need to be curious about. And the first one is, what is the current situation showing us about the change capability we have and don't yet have? It's clearly a really good opportunity to, right now, the situation is shining a light on what you're really good at. What strengths did you absolutely rely on when you had to respond quickly, and how does that work for you? And then what might that mean for a post-COVID transition? I'm sure most of your organisations now are plotting different paths out of this and trying to work out how to make it work and what it means for the next 18 months or so. And so wouldn't it be awful if you developed a plan that actually didn't leverage your strengths and maybe needed to rely on things that you really ought to have realised right now aren't some of your strong points? So what does it mean for that transition? And then therefore, where should we focus our efforts in the short, medium and long term? And that'll help us just hone down some of those plans as we move forward, as we start to recover our organisations and we start to reimagine what it could be. So just to be clear, capability is a very broad topic. If you live in the world of change capability, as I do, clearly it covers an awful lot of things other than your people. But for today's session, just want to focus on your people. So as we go through this, what I'd like you to do, you've got the opportunity to think about what this looks like in your organisation. So when you think about people, it's everything from the knowledge that they've applied, it might be the skills that they have, it might be the behaviours and attitudes that they've displayed. So that's where we're focusing today. And why is it important? Well, clearly you guys think it's important because you've come along to this session today. But these quotes start to give us a really good clue. So the work of Peter Senge and the Learning Organisation make it clear that the ability to evolve and change our organisations is actually a really important competitive advantage that we should be building. The quote from Eric Hoffer I love, you know, the learned find themselves beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. So if you've seen people in your organisation or perhaps other organisations whose narrative is along the lines of, okay, well, we just need to get through this and then we get back to normal. That implication that we've got all the answers and we just need to get back to what we were doing. Well, coming out of this, the world has changed. The world has changed forever. And that old world doesn't exist. So for those people in organisations who think that we just get back to that same situation, they are going to be beautifully equipped for a world that has changed and not the one they're currently living in. So if evolution is critical to survival, why don't we talk about it more? Why don't we measure it? Why aren't our senior leaders and our organisations making a big thing of their ability to change if it's critical for survival and it's a massive competitive advantage? Well, one of the things we know about change capability, and I'm sure many of you are feeling this as well, it's a bit intangible. It's not like your technical or more overt skills where it's easy to demonstrate. They're relatively easy to build. So something like the ability to build a product, the ability to program a computer, the ability to do some of these things that are more overt, the ability to sell. Those are quite overt and they're relatively easy to build. And they're relatively easy to put on a job description. They're also relatively easy for your competitors to copy. And they're also the first skills and capabilities that start to go out of use. So they become obsolete quite quickly. So whilst those technical and overt skills are important, they're actually not what makes the difference. It's your core skills, your core capability that makes the difference to an organization. Because having the core capability of change will last you well and serve you well and make your organization more successful, regardless of how your strategy changes or who your customer is or what your product is. That core capability is really important. I think about this sometimes as the difference between a bicep and your core muscles. You know, if you think about a bicep, it's easy, it's obvious, you can point to it, you can build it, you can measure it, you can see how much you can weigh, and it's quite obvious. But you try pointing to your core muscles. And how do you measure your core muscles? So to me, that's a similar situation that we find ourselves in. So the fact that it can be quite intangible, what I'm going to share with you today is a framework that makes the intangible tangible. And so it clearly shows you where to look and what to look for. It's built out of a range of other models, but what it does, it gives you the picture on the box. So it gives you the starting point. It gives you the framework that covers change capability from all angles so that you can apply it in your organization in whatever way makes sense for your environment. So let's get into the model. Where to look? There are 4 cohorts that you're going to look at. The first one is individuals. So you've heard the phrase change starts with me. And that's because one of the areas where we're going to shine a light is when you think about the individuals in your organization over the last couple of months, what has been their ability to change? This one is a dependency for all the others. So what one of the cohorts we'll look at is what's the behaviour and the abilities that we've seen demonstrated by individuals in your organisation. Then we're going to move across to leaders and influencers. Now, don't be fooled into thinking that a leader is a person with a team under them in an organisation chart. Line managers are critically important, but when it comes to change, many of you will know leaders and influencers come from all sorts of places. So when it comes to change, you're looking for people who are in roles, particularly, who are in a good position to influence. For example, if you have roles that work closely with external partners, it might be an outsourcing arrangement, it might be a joint venture that you're dependent on a partner to provide goods and services to a customer. It might also be your shared services. So many of your shared services functions will work across your silos. And so they're really good ambassadors for change. And if their ability is high, they're really good role models and really good advocates for change and creating that confidence. So as you're thinking about this, think about who that is. Who are the humans attached to that in your organisation? And choose for this, you can think about this at a whole of organisation level or just your department or the area you work in, whatever makes sense to you. So that's your team and your stakeholder, that's your leaders and influencers. And then we move out to the organisation, and generally this is senior leaders, because what we're looking for here is the ability to make decisions about what gets changed, when it gets changed, what's important, what's not important, where the money gets spent, where the time gets spent, where the focus and energy is. And so generally those functions are performed by your senior leaders. And then last but not least, your change specialists. And I know we have some of those on the call today. Now, some of you are change specialists. Some of you will work in an organisation where you have people with change in their title. You will have change managers, perhaps, in your organisation. Many of you won't. Many of you won't have people who are called change managers or change specialists. But what you will have is people that, whether you realise it or not, you are relying on to land that change safely. So as we design and build a particular change, and then we bring it to life in our workplace, somebody is helping to make sure that that change gets embedded and that the value is actually created out of that. It might be that you rely on your HR department. It might be you get support from your learning and development or your communications teams. It might just be the line managers that are on the receiving end of that change that have to adopt it and embed it and create the value out of it. So those are the four lenses that we're going to look at. And if you think about those cohorts, we're going to move to a poll because I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to keep adding those questions to the chat. So which cohort do you think has shown the greatest ability to change in the last few months? As the light has been shining on them. Okay, and we'll close that poll off. 3, 2, 1. And we'll take a look at the results. So which cohort has shown the greatest ability to change? Interesting, individuals. I'm hearing this a lot. I was listening into a panel recently and somebody worked in an organisation where they felt they had, coming into the COVID-19 pandemic, they felt that their workforce was fairly resistant. There was lots of talk of change fatigue. They felt they resisted almost everything. And then when this situation came along, they actually proved they've got the ability to be very resilient. And so it's interesting that we're seeing that as such a strong trend. That's fantastic. Thank you. And so now you know where to look. When you get there, what are you going to look for? So we're going to go through each of the cohorts and just give you the high level on what you're looking for. So again, be thinking about your organisation over the last 2 months. What have you seen? So the ability of everybody to believe and self-manage. So what does that mean? Belief is your mindset. So I'm sure many of you have heard the term growth mindset. It might be a learning mindset. What you're looking for here is, has there been a dominant belief that there is a path through this, that it is possible to maybe even find opportunities? And then the self-management comes in because there is so much uncertainty and so many things that have been going on in this environment that will naturally cause us anxiety and will trigger our fight or flight response. But how is everyone's ability to deal with that, to intervene and to choose a response that's more constructive? I'll give you an example for this one. Working with the senior leadership team earlier this year, we were putting together their strategy, and it was a really strong strategy. And towards the end of March, we had our first Zoom meeting to mobilise that strategy. One of the senior leaders piped up during that meeting and said, we shouldn't even be talking about this. Why are we talking about strategy? There's no point. We've got all sorts of problems to deal with. We should just shelve this. It's just ridiculous. And then somebody else around that table said, yeah, I think we've got to have a look at our strategy, given that the world's changed a bit. But actually, I think there's a couple in there that we can fast track, because now people are working at home. I think we've got an opportunity to mobilise a couple of those more quickly. And so what that demonstrated was two individuals, one of whom clearly had a very fixed mindset, decided it was no good, it was awful, and there was no room for negotiation. And also his ability to self-manage was missing in action at that moment. He was clearly feeling very anxious, and that level of emotion and angst was coming across in the way that he was delivering his words to the group. The other person clearly showed an open mindset in not only believing that there is a path through this, and that just came as something that he was not questioning at all. Of course, there's a path through this, and actually, can we find some opportunities? So that's what you're looking for in your individuals, and given your answer to the poll, I think perhaps that's some of what you've seen in individuals, is the level of what we can sometimes call resilience, but a basic fundamental belief that it's going to be okay. And then moving to our leaders and influencers, the ability to understand and influence. So what this means is understanding who your stakeholder groups are, understanding what they need, not because you sat in a dark room and decided, but you're tracking and you've got your radar out for what your stakeholder groups need and what they will need. And then influencing is creating an environment that instills confidence. So it doesn't exacerbate the anxiety, it doesn't leave you in neutral, it actually creates the feeling of confidence. Again, I'll give you an example. I'm working with a not-for-profit at the organisation at the moment. And the CEO of that organisation, before there were any formal and government-driven lockdowns, she'd started to think about how the different scenarios might play out. She'd identified her stakeholder groups as the board and the partner organisations and the youth workers that work in the organisation. And she was already on the front foot. So she was thinking, okay, what do I need to make the board confident? Okay, they're probably going to want financial modelling to see that we can actually survive and see what these different scenarios look like. So she got cracking with that in the first week in March. And then she started to think about the partner organisations. Okay, so they're going to be moving their operations online as well. So why don't I host a meeting once a week where we all get on board and we all share tips about how we're doing that? And she set that up. She thought about the youth workers. They're going to work online. Some of those will transition easily, some won't. What do we need to do? We need to put structure into the day. So she was on the front foot with a lot of that. And then really importantly, she's kept her radar going. And as those needs change, she's been one step ahead in making sure that she can give them what they need to instill that confidence. And I'm sure if you think about your own needs and that of your team, as you've gone through the last few months, they've changed quite significantly. What you needed in that first week from working from home is very different to what you needed in week 5 or week 6. And so leaders need to be able to understand and influence. And then moving to the organisation level, this is the ability to constantly be on the lookout for new information that might impact your plans. So if you imagine that what you've got is a dynamic roadmap of change. Now you've got one, whether you've ever written it down and whether you can actually articulate and share and manage it can sometimes be another issue. But either way, you've got a complex web of changes and business as usual that are going through that your organisation is going through, formally or informally, organised or not organised. But if we go to the upper end of capability here, it's the ability to manage this dynamic, excuse me, dynamic roadmap. It's the ability to constantly be on the lookout for that new information and tweak your plan. So it could be that something's changed inside the organisation. It could be that something's changed outside the organisation. And the COVID-19 pandemic was a good example of a very extreme way of that. But the ability of senior leaders to constantly be on the lookout for that new information and make wise decisions about how to adapt the plan, to optimise the value and to optimise the use of resources. And that's a constant moving target. Now that has to be partnered with the ability to actually give clear direction as a result. So if you're constantly moving your roadmap around, and even if you're doing it based on some really good data and some really good decision making, if you don't communicate clearly, it just looks like you don't know what you're doing. It looks chaotic. So in your senior leaders, the ability to provide direction is really important. And again, I'll give you an example here. So an organisation that already has this as a bit of a muscle, they've already got some of these processes in place. And so when the COVID-19 situation hit, they were able to rely on a base capability of senior leaders who could come together to make these types of decisions. Now, what it meant for them was that within 2 weeks, they clearly went through their change program and they clearly communicated, these are the programs we'll fast track, these are the ones that we're going to put on ice, and these are the ones we're just going to try and progress. And so if you worked on any of those teams, it was really clear not only what you were supposed to do, but why. Why did you end up in group A, B, or C? That was really clear. So everyone could continue the momentum in their programs as a result. And they've kept that going, importantly. They've kept their radar out for the constantly changing situation, and they've adapted their plans and their decisions as a result. Okay, so to our change specialists, the ability to manage each change and change cumulatively. Now, there's an analogy here I like to use, and I talk about landing change safely. And I think about the change or the project as the aeroplane, and the environment into which you're introducing that, the environment into which you're landing that change is like your landing strip. So you can build your plane in a shed, and it can be the best plane you've ever seen, and it can be gorgeous and lovely, and you can have all the right number of engines, and you can have given all your governance attention to how gorgeous the plane is and how great it is. But if you've only got a dirt track to land it on, that plane's going to crash, and you're never going to get the value that you'd hoped. So managing each change, think back to some of the changes that you brought into place at the beginning of the situation. And was there from the beginning, not at the end, not at go live, right from the beginning, did you spend as much time thinking about the runway as you did thinking about the plane? Did you spend as much time and energy making sure the environment was ready for the landing as you did on what colour the plane was and how many engines it had to have? And if you've got equal attention throughout on both, you're going to maximise the value. So that's what you're looking at in terms of managing each change. Now, the magic comes when we acknowledge reality. Planes don't exist in isolation. And the truth is the pilot doesn't decide when to land. So a magic point in maturity comes when we realise that it's the accumulation of changes that actually get embedded into our reality. And we start to think about it from the perspective of the runway. And I know some of your organisations do this, and some, the rate, pace, complexity of change may not yet have driven you to this point. It probably will at some point. And I know many of your organisations are actually in this transition here of transitioning to running, organising and making decisions about change based on how they land, not based on how they're delivered. And so again, when we're looking at the upper end of that capability, it's knowing what are the rules of the landing. It's making sure that that is influencing the design of our changes and that we're able to land those changes in a way that means that we can maximise the value. So that's managing change individually and managing cumulative change. I'll give you an example of this one. An organisation that has a fairly mature change practice, at the beginning of the COVID-19 situation, they deployed their change managers to the operational changes they were making. And it became clear very quickly that actually they were getting in the way down there. And the operations guys just said, can you just get out of our way? We just need to get this stuff done. So whilst it felt a bit odd for a while, they quickly redeployed themselves on the cumulative change. Because if you imagine each department, each area, each team were just quickly instigating all sorts of changes. And what the change managers could see when they looked at it cumulatively was several of these changes were impacting the same teams, and that actually we needed to bundle some of those things and integrate that so that we'd land those things safely. And they've added massive value all the way through the last couple of months by actually looking at the cumulative impact of change and staying out of the way on the individuals. Okay, then let's move to questions.
Okay, the first question that we have comes from Kim, and the question is, Helen, if there are shortfalls in more than one area, how do we decide which to tackle first?
Yeah, really good question. Look, I will always say it depends. It depends what you're trying to achieve. It depends on the nature of your landscape. as to what you need. Now, one of the traps I find people fall into is just because you're really not very good at something, that's not necessarily the thing you need to go to. Many of you will do strengths-based work, but it's really, there may be something that you're a bit mediocre at that you can bolster really easily. So the other thing to bear in mind is, where are you not starting from scratch? So if you've got a culture program underway, then that's a really good place to tag on the individual capability you're looking for. If you've got a leadership program underway, that's a really good place to tag on the leadership component of change capability. So probably those two things: you need to get a really good understanding of what your organisation actually needs, a really good understanding of where you're at, and then what can you do quickly, practically and easily to create a value in the cohort that's most important.
Great, thanks Helen. We have another good question from Duncan, which is, can you give some examples of what we might do to build change capability in the leaders and influencers group?
Oh, my favourite group. If I had $1 to spend on a change program, I'd spend it on these guys. Yeah, so probably two things I've found work well together. The first one is definitely getting a kickstart and getting everyone on the same page. So creating a common language and giving simple, practical guidance and advice and tools and frameworks to line managers, so that they know easily what they've got to do and how they've got to do it. Now, I think one of the things that I find working with leaders, and many of you I'm sure will find the same, there is a difference when you're talking about change leadership as opposed to normal leadership. Now, one is a sort of subset of the other. So I think you definitely need to be able to have a conversation with leaders about change capability and what's expected of them. And as I say, making that a common language and making it really clear and really practical. That gets everybody to the same page. It gives you a real kickstart and puts some energy and momentum behind your change leadership. And change lends itself really well to learning on the job. So where I've seen the real magic happen is you do that program that gives you that underlying, that foundation, that gives you the kickstart. And then in the moment, you offer coaching, you offer clinics, because it's all very well to do the program, but it's the coaching and the clinics where you really learn the art and science of change leadership. And so those two things together, I find work incredibly well.
Thanks, Helen. We have a question from Margaret Ann, and the question is, keen to hear your advice on how to engage technical leaders who don't believe in change management or see its value. That's a good one.
Oh, I wish I had the magic bullet for this one. Look, I wish I had wise words, and I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I still come across this every day in organisations. I'm not even going to try and come up with some magic answer to this one. It is very difficult. And in fact, I've just come off an assignment. Imagine, I've been doing this over 20 years. I write books on it. I run workshops on it. I do the job. I get in organisations. I've just come out of an assignment where I really struggle to convert the non-believers. So I'd love anyone else to give advice. Probably from the more technical perspective, what I'll do, I'll tag on to something they already care about. So if they care about money, I'll talk about the fact it saves money. If they care about risk, I'll talk about the fact it's managing risk. If they care about their people, I'll say it's about doing the right thing with their people. But beyond that, that lever as an entry point that attaches to something they already care about, how you actually build that forward, I'm still struggling with, I have to be honest.
All right, we have just time for one more question, which is from Nicola. We have adapted so well and so quickly to the change in a relatively conservative organisation in a highly regulated environment. So how do we maintain the pace of the change after all of this is over? Is it the key leaders and influencers?
I wonder whether some of this is actually the whole workforce. It's the workforce that said, you know what, this worked for me. You know, I worked from home and it was great. I don't want to do it every day of the week, but actually it provided me with a much better sense of well-being. I don't have to commute, whatever it is. But what I am encouraging, certainly the organisations I'm working with, to do is have the conversation. be very open to what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what do you want to take forward into the next phase. Now, the next phase will be a bit weird and lumpy. You know, we're only going to have whatever it is, a quarter of the people in the office, but this is such an opportunity to capture that, to have that conversation that says, look what we've been able to do. And so what do you want to take into the new world with you? What do you want to leave behind from the old world? And what do you want to take into the new world? And how do we all agree that? So for me, it feels like a big conversation amongst everybody where we capture the bits that we've loved about this, and we all hold each other to account for bringing that to fruition as we move through the next, months and years.
Great. Well, just in the interest of time, there's been a lot of great comments about the plane analogy, so that seems to have resonated with a lot of people. So thank you for that. That's the end of our question session for today.
That's great. Thanks very much. And I'll be handing back to Tony.
Okay. Thanks very much, Helen. Our follow-up email will include links to a number of resources that will help you further investigate your organisation's change capability. I would like to thank everyone for attending today, and thanks to Helen for her insights. Keep your eye out for future webinars and short courses. Otherwise, I hope you all keep well and keep learning. Thank you.